I'm Eilis McDaniel, Director of Family and Children's Policy in the Department of Health. I have policy responsibility for child protection, looked after children, adoption and family support. Thank you for the invitation to speak at today's Little Voices Big Decisions event. There are 4 areas that I want to cover by way of today's presentation. They include the legislative framework that we as policymakers work within or require others to work within, and what it requires in terms of the engagement or involvement of children and young people in decision making by public authorities affecting their young lives. Some key policy documents, instruments and specifically how they reinforce what the legislation requires in terms of involvement of children and young people. Thirdly then, how we measure up against our own policies in terms of how we have involved children and young people in policy development within health and social care. And finally, what I consider to be the key challenges going forward. Turning to the first slide then. All of us work within the framework of the United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child, a legally binding international agreement against which we are assessed periodically, and we're about to start the latest examination by the UN Committee on the Rights of the Child. Article 12, which relates to the respect for the views of the child, is particularly relevant to what we're discussing today. However, Article 13, freedom of expression, Article 2, non-discrimination, and Article 3, the best interest of the child, are also clearly of relevance. The Children's Services Cooperation Act, brought forward in 2015, requires children's authorities, including government departments, to work together to improve the well-being of children and young people in Northern Ireland. It requires the adoption of a children and young people strategy by the Executive, and in doing so requires the Executive, that's government departments, to consult children and young people, their parents and guardians and others representing their interests. Work is ongoing to establish effective participation mechanisms as part of implementation of the strategy. And while the process is being led by the Department of Education, the Department of Health is fully engaged in the process. The Children Order, the principal body of law governing the care and protection of children in Northern Ireland, is founded on a number of key principles to safeguard children and promote their welfare. One of 8 key principles is that children should be kept informed about what happens to them and should participate when decisions are being made about their future. The Children Order not only guides social workers by creating statutory duties for them and affording them powers to act, it also guides the courts. The welfare checklist provided for at Article 3 of the Children Order requires a court to have regard for the ascertainable wishes and feelings of the child concerned, taking account of the child's age and understanding. And when a health and social care trust is considering making a child looked after or providing them with accommodation under Article 21 or 26, again they are required to ascertain the child's wishes and give them due consideration, again taking account of the child's age and understanding. The requirement to take account of a child's age and level of understanding recognises that it may not always be possible or practicable nor appropriate to seek the views or wishes of a child. Guardians ad litem, likewise appointed under Article 60 of the Children Order to represent the child's interests in court proceedings, are required to speak to and listen to children. It's important that children feel that they have been consulted, that their views have been properly considered, and that they have participated as partners in the decision-making process. However, it's equally important that children are not made to feel that the burden of decision-making falls to them, nor should they be forced to attend meetings if they choose not to do so. Crucially, where a child has communication difficulties, appropriate specialist provision will need to be made available so that it's possible for the child to express his views. Other legislation which explicitly requires the involvement of children and young people is the Safeguarding Board Act of 2011. The Act established the Safeguarding Board for Northern Ireland, a partnership tasked with working together to safeguard children and to promote their welfare. In the exercise of its statutory functions, the SBNI is required by the Act to promote communication between the SBNI and children. The Adoption and Children Bill, which the Health Minister is aiming to introduce in the Assembly before summer recess, makes a range of provisions to further safeguard the right of children and young people who are in care, have left care or are at risk of coming into care, to have a say in what happens to them, to be listened to and have their views taken into account where appropriate. The bill introduces a new welfare checklist, similar to that in the Children Order, but specifically tailored for adoption decisions, which includes a requirement to ensure that the child's wishes and feelings, etc., are taken into account. The bill will amend the Children Order to strengthen the voice of the child in a number of ways. Trusts will be required to ascertain and consider a child's wishes and feelings before deciding what services, if any, to provide to children in need, and when making certain decisions relating to child protection. The duty to take into account a child's wishes before providing them with accommodation under Article 21 will be expanded to require their feelings to be considered also. A wider range of children and young people will be able to benefit from advocacy services, which the bill places on a statutory footing. A wider range of children and young people will have the right to raise issues or make representations, and that includes complaints about the social care services they receive. And finally, the bill will introduce into the Children Order a range of corporate parenting principles, which include a duty on trusts to encourage children and young people to express their views, wishes and feelings, and to take those into account. There are a number of policy documents which reinforce the requirement to engage children and young people in the course of health and social care policy development and/or service design. So, for example, the Department of Health launched a co-production guide for Northern Ireland, Connecting and Realising Value Through People, in August 2018 to support the application of a co-production approach across our health and social care system. Among other things, co-production, which we also refer to as co-design and co-creation, is about ensuring we work in partnership with users of health and social care services and place them at the centre of decision making to improve health and wellbeing outcomes, and that includes children and young people. Cooperating to Safeguard Children and Young People, which we published in 2017, which is guidance for agencies working to keep children safe from harm, includes guidance on involving children in the process of protection. The guidance stipulates that practitioners should take full account of the rights of the child or young person and meaningfully engage them in decisions which contribute to meeting their needs, including their safeguarding needs. It requires that children and young people are made aware and helped to understand what services are available and why they're being provided, how they can be involved, and how they can be helped to articulate their views, wishes, feelings, and their own sense of the risks to which they're exposed and what they feel can be done to keep them safe, how their views will be taken into account when decisions about services to be provided and their future are being made, what concerns professionals have about them, how safeguarding and child protection processes work, and why and how decisions which run contrary to the views of children and young people have been made. The guidance also stipulates that children and young people who lack capacity to express their views on a particular matter should be provided with more specific or personalised support, for example, advocacy, representation or communication support, such as through interpreters for sign or other languages. Importantly, the guidance makes it clear that all children and young people should be informed that ultimately decisions will be taken to safeguard them and to promote their welfare. One more recent development is the use of child right impact assessments conducted on new policy relating to children and young people. Through the assessment process, as policymakers, we're prompted to scrutinise the involvement of children and young people in the development of proposals, and that assists us to consider how best to ensure that the voices of children are heard from the earliest stage of policy development to evidence that it's been done, and to demonstrate how the contributions of children and young people have influenced the design of policy. By way of the third slide, I'm trying to demonstrate whether we're following our own policy by engaging children and young people in the policy development process. And there are a few examples which I think demonstrate that we have, and also that we're getting better at how we go about it. In establishing the Safeguarding Board for Northern Ireland and the development of an online safety strategy, we sought the views of parents, children, and included some of those involved in the child protection process. The online safety strategy, recently published by the department, originally called an e-safety strategy, was renamed as a result of feedback received from children and young people. In consulting on a draft adoption and children bill, a young person's version of the consultation document was produced. On behalf of the department, Bernardo's facilitated the engagement of young people aged between 13 and 19 with a range of physical and learning disabilities, including autism and visual impairment. Boypick engaged care experienced young people aged 13 and over through a workshop involving departmental officials. Again, assisted by VOIPIC, care experienced young people participated in a process to identify alternative accommodation options for children in care. Departmental officials and health and social care professionals were part of the process alongside the children and young people. Care experienced children and young people were also integral to the development of a recently published Looked After Children strategy, A Life Deserved, through a series of events including public events in each health and social care trust area and workshops facilitated by VOIPIC and Fostering Network to capture the views of under 12s, adolescents and children with a disability. A questionnaire, play and survey work was also facilitated by VOIPIC to capture the views of children and young people, including at summer camps. And discussions were also supported by Include Youth to capture the views of older adolescents, care leavers and those in the Juvenile Justice Centre. Department of Health and Department of Education officials were represented at the majority of these events. Feedback was provided to children and young people on how their input was reflected in the draft strategy, and they were provided with a further opportunity to input to the final version. The feedback session was facilitated by VOIPIC, held at a weekend and in an informal setting. Department of Health and Department of Education officials also attended. Officials reported that the children and young people who'd been involved in the earlier events demonstrated a real sense of ownership of the strategy. Teenage and under 12 versions of the strategy were also produced for consultation and final publication, and we've made a commitment to ensure that children and young people will be integral to the implementation of the strategy. Another example includes the development of a new service model for separated or unaccompanied asylum-seeking children and young people. The proposals currently being consulted on have been informed by children and young people who have arrived in Northern Ireland seeking asylum. Engagement was facilitated by VOIPIC and took the form of conversations held wherever and however the young people felt most comfortable, for example, where the young person lived, or on a walk in a local park. In the establishment of a new regional joint care and justice campus, we've engaged children and young people with direct experience of the Lakewood Secure Care Centre and Woodlands Juvenile Justice Centre, with the assistance of a number of organisations represented on a reference group. The views of children and young people reflected in the consultation document published in October 2020. A child-friendly version of the consultation document and an animation explaining the campus proposals were also produced and used to engage children and young people in the consultation exercise. One final example includes a proposal to extend emergency COVID regulations, which provided a level of flexibility to health and social care trusts in the exercise of their statutory duties as it related to looked after children and care leavers. And as a consequence of engaging children and young people in the process, plans to extend the emergency regulations were shelved. There's a growing emphasis on co-design in health and social care, and that requires us to engage service users at a much earlier stage and give them the opportunity to shape policy proposals. This is a world away from consultation on well-developed policy proposals. This is something we'll need to get better at in terms of our engagement of children and young people in policy development. It's evident that we rely quite significantly on third sector organisations to support the engagement with children and young people. We need to reach the point where we have the confidence to work as equal partners with third sector organisations in our engagement with children and young people in the course of policy development, implementation and review. It's also important that we take broadly consistent approaches across all government departments, and I think this will be facilitated through the implementation of the Children and Young People strategy. To date, we have engaged with older children and teenagers in the main. The nature of a policy or service may at times make this necessary, and this is what is acknowledged in the legislation. We acknowledge that this is an area where we need to get better and look forward to the outcome of today's event. It will hopefully help us strengthen our current participation practice. My own area of policy relates to children and young people and families who are among the most vulnerable. Informed by children and young people, we must continue to find ways to engage them, which recognises their vulnerability but never patronises them and always minimises the risk of traumatising or re-traumatising. Thank you, and I look forward to receiving the feedback from today's event.